What? Would you mind filming?
Oh, it's being filmed. Excellent. Utterly marvellous.
Is anyone object to being filmed?
Don't worry, I'm just going to get
Yeah,
filmy.
I don't think anyone else will be got in. I don't.
Okay, alright.
You know, I don't want to put anyone on the internet unwillingly, but I'm rather proud of this, and I don't really want to deliver
Is this
it again.
going to go on the Bonderings?
It's going to go on the YouTube channel, yeah. If there are no objections.
Live film.
Good, good. I don't hear any objections. Right. Are we rolling?
Yep.
Excellent. Right. Thank you very much, John, for inviting me to speak again in front of the class. I fear that they may be growing a bit tired of my tirades by this point, but until one of you volunteers to take up my happy burden of speaking before you, I've got no choice but to carry on. I'd like to preface my argument this morning slightly by saying that the question that we have before us this morning and the position that it has besought me to adopt to challenge many of my preconceived notions on this particular dilemma. However, in the spirit of a true and earnest debate, it's often behoved both myself and the Honourable Lady of the Opposition to adopt a school of thought that's not only in opposition to one another, but also in opposition to our own sincerely held beliefs. What I would make a point of, though, this morning is that in endeavouring to argue the side of my case, I've found that, allotted though it may be, my side had more merits than I initially felt. In plain terms, I've managed to convince myself, and so I hope I'll be able to convince you in due course. So now that I've preambled as long as I care to, I ask of you your permission. Allow me to indulge in the floxy naughty nihilpification of Rome. Allow me to indulge in the panegyrizing of Greece, to applaud Greece and denigrate Rome, and allow me to prove to you, over the following utterances, that it is Greece that was greater than Rome. Now for my first theatre of attack, as it were, I want to turn to a quote from the late Earl of Stockton, that is the Right Honourable Harold Macmillan, former Prime Minister of this United Kingdom. I'm sorry? Yeah. Set me off there. So it rather amused me when I considered this quote, because generally what one will do is one will take an example, a tale from the ancient world, and we'll use that to parable something that's happening in the modern day. Whereas what I'm about to do here is I'm going to do the converse of that. I'm going to use something modern to parable something ancient. So it was the middle of the Second World War, and Macmillan was explaining to his friend Richard Crosman how the British Empire's star was diminishing, and how Britain would play a role in the new American-dominated world, in the new American hegemony. And he explained the decline of the British Empire with and her place in this new world through a classical analogy, and I think the quote sort of encapsulates one of the main points I want to drive at here, so I'm going to recite it for you, if I may. We are Greeks in this American empire. You will find the Greeks you will find the Americans much as the Greeks found the Romans. Great, big, vulgar, bustling people, more vigorous than we are and also more idle, with more unspoiled virtues, but also more corrupt. We must run Allied forces headquarters, as the Greek slaves ran the operations of the Emperor Claudius. Now, that last sentence I'm going to return to momentarily, but the broad application of that quote and the metaphor therein is that though Rome may have had her heyday long after Greece's star had faded from the sky, the latter's successes were much, much greater than the former's, and the former's were built upon the latter's. Just as it's easy now to look at the world as it is mostly run from the White House and from Washington, D.C., and to forget the earlier centuries of British domination of the world, it is also easy to look at the centuries of Roman hegemony over the known European world and forget and ignore that which came before it. Another parallel to be drawn is that so often used line, that so often perpetrated line, that it was the Romans who were doers and the Greeks who were thinkers. Now, where boisterous Americans here stand in for the jingoistic, gung-ho Romans, it's the dignified Britons that symbolise the wiser and the nobler Greeks. And while it may be intuitive to argue that sitting on a rock thinking doesn't actually change the world, it's going out there with an army that changes the world, I think this is a kind of an unintellectual and a reductive view of what really changes the world. I wouldn't genuinely claim to be more terrified of a man waving a biro at me than someone brandishing a scimitar or a claymore. But the pen really is mightier than the sword, I would argue. And the argument is the same here. Even though the Greeks may have not had the pen as we think of it today, their thoughts were mightier than the Romans' actions. Indeed, so many of the Romans' actions were influenced by Greek thought, and those thoughts themselves have changed the world more than Rome's actions. Allow me now to segue into my second theatre of attack, in that I shall extol thought as being superior to action. I shall explain my case there, given that Greece is known for her thought and Rome known for her action. I possibly, just for the argument's sake, I'll concede for the moment to the opposition that Rome may have been the mistress in the field of doing. However, it is that unjustly belittled thinking that I think has really made the difference here. You may look around yourselves in England, in York particularly, and see the ruins and the remnants of Roman fortresses, Roman walls, Roman buildings, Roman roads. But in time, these masonry sepulchres to a dead empire, protruding like the ribs from the long wasted away carcass of some great beast, will fade, they will turn to dust, and they will be washed into the tides of history. They are, as Ozymandias' statue was, I'm sure you'll all be aware of this, they are half sunk and shattered, and while it may yet remain stamped on these lifeless things the glory of Rome, the lone and level sands do invariably stretch far away, invariably and metaphorically, admittedly. Ideas, however, are immune to this kind of decay. If there is a will to remember, and there is such a will in today's society, ideas are immortal. It is, as Sir Winston Churchill said in his maiden speech to the House of Commons, "Wise words, sir, stand the test of time," and the Greeks' words were wise, infinitesimally wiser, I would argue, than those of Lord Randolph Churchill, whose words' wisdom had been the subject of his son's praise in that particular speech. Greece, I would argue, is the font, the crucible of so many of our notions of today. And more even than this, to move into my third theatre of attack, they were the font of so many notions familiar, integral even, to Rome herself and Rome's thought and operations. Greece gave us so very many things, and I think Rome is perhaps the greatest thing that Greece did ever give us. To talk of Rome without Greece is to talk of trifle without custard, to talk of buildings without walls, to talk of the Beatles without Paul, to talk of these debates without the Lady of the Opposition. And I think in all cases, it is the former which is wholly dependent upon the latter. I have here an exhibit for you. This is a book entitled Legends of Greece and Rome. And why is it that in this book and in innumerable other volumes, Greece and Rome's legends are moulded together, amalgamated into one? Well, it is because the simple fact that Roman myth alone could be written out on the back of a single stamp. Republican Roman politics is another core. I beg your pardon. I've skipped a bit. So Greece and Rome's legends are amalgamated, and this Greek provision of nearly all of Rome's deities and fables offers for us a discernible trajectory which we can follow. It outlines a relationship of dependence, utter, wholehearted dependence, that can be seen again and again and again. And now there's a bit I jumped to. Republican Roman politics is one cornerstone principle. You may be aware there was no Roman constitution but for the fact of shared limited power, the idea that there must never again be a king. And where does this idea come from, ladies and gentlemen? It arises from the idea of democracy, a Greek word to label a Greek innovation with its roots in the Athenian assembly. And what is it, I might ask of you, that Rome did with this great gift of Greek democracy? She threw it away. It is, as to mention the third former Prime Minister in this speech, it is as Boris Johnson said when he was talking in a similar debate to this, it was the Greeks who gave you the vote and the Romans who took it away. And yet even throwing away this Hellenistic principle of democracy, what is it that the Romans turned to after that? They turned to the Principate, which was equally influenced by Greece, I would argue. Not a single one of the Julio-Claudian emperors, I would argue, are free of influence, tangible or intangible, from Greeks or Greek thought. Augustus was in Greece when he heard of Julius Caesar's assassination, and the two major constitutional battles at Actium and at Philippi occurred in Greece. Tiberius sought refuge in Rhodes from the strain of public life. Caligula rejoiced in the theatrical aspects of Greek culture. And Claudius, as aforestated in that quote from Mr. Macmillan, was influenced to a considerable degree by his Greek freedmen like Pallas and Narcissus. And of course Nero, perhaps most of them all, the Hellenistic Nero, had Greek tutors in youth and quoted Greek prose all through his adulthood up to his eventual suicide. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a cursory list that I compiled when I was writing this from the top of my head. And then there are the Hellenistic contributions to the arts. Scarcely was there a Roman poet who did not relish in a Greek turn of phrase or a Greek allegory to serve their needs. Virgil's Aeneid, often held up as one of the greatest works of Latin literature, extols the Greeks by making them Rome's ancestors, because, of course, if you are the Romans, then you must have had great ancestors to explain how you were great. And through Aeneas, Rome ennobles the Greeks by making them her ancestors. And then it is scarcely necessary for me to comment on the enormous and immeasurable influence of the Homeric epics, the Odyssey and the Iliad, which still have influence to this day. Moreover is the Greek architectural and statuary influence. The amphitheatre, of which the Colosseum is an iconic example, saw widespread use in Greece long before it saw widespread use in Rome, and I would argue much more noble use in Greece. And so there it is that one of the greatest symbols of Rome is in fact a Greek invention. And just as Greco-Roman mythology is amalgamated into one thing, so too is Greco-Roman architectural style amalgamated into one thing. And I think it is possible that we give Rome too much credit by offering her half of the name of this field in which she only ever attempted a parasitic imitation act. Yet further still, philosophy is another Greek word, and a field which is dominated right the way from its earliest stages through to the modern day. In this very building, down this very corridor, philosophy classes are dominated by the writings and ponderings of Greek philosophers such as Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, Zeno of Citium, Epicurus and Diogenes. Show me a Roman philosopher who was not influenced by these men, and show me a Roman philosopher who can rival these titans of thought. I could go on talking about how Rome was wholly influenced by Greece in the fields of language, medicine, music, dress, food, art, agriculture, entertainment, sports, tragedy, comedy, historiography, biography, science, technology, etc. But I sense you are beginning to grasp my gist here. It is at this point that I'm finished flogging the almighty existence out of Macmillan's words. However, there are still many of my own words forthcoming. I've rattled off here for some time about ideas, how Greece were appropriated by the ever-seeking Romans. But I think it would be remiss of me not to discuss Greece's actions themselves and evaluate them. It's possible that earlier, when I conceded for argument's sake to the Honourable Lady of the Opposition that Rome was the mistress of action and that Greece did not play a part in this, that I was offering credence to a misguided understanding of the true state of affairs. In their day, the Greeks were rather apt at doing, I would argue, and that is what I'm going to argue now. So what might the Honourable Lady of the Opposition say were the superior actions of Rome? Well, it's possible she might turn to the empire, supposedly Rome's greatest achievement, her empire, which lasted for centuries, spanned the breadth of the Mediterranean. And yet, even if we ignore the mire of debate which one could get into as to the relative vices and virtues of imperialism, because neither of our societies here is innocent of that, I'm afraid to say, it is still iniquitous to argue that Rome outranks Greece in terms of empire. One need look no further than Alexander's conquest of Persia to show that the Greeks were equally adept at imperialism. And just like in so many fields, empire was an idea the Greeks got to first and the Romans toddled along to afterwards, with an example to follow the Greeks did not have. Indeed, to make allusion to my previous point, irregardless of whatever schools of thought there may be, perhaps held by people in this room, on Alexander and whether he was so great or not, Rome certainly admired him, and that is what is the point. Biographies written by Arrian and Plutarch show the Romans were interested in Alexander, and the fact that when Germanicus was at the peak of his popularity, he was hailed as the Roman Alexander, shows that he was admired in Roman society. And then let us look a little closer at Roman's empire. Even with an admiration for Alexander, it can be wholeheartedly argued that they failed to follow in his footsteps, the footsteps they so praised. I ask you to contrast the Susan marriages Alexander conducted as one of the most popular decisions he ever made, and striving towards cultural integration. I ask you to contrast this with the decades of political turmoil and upheaval over the rights or lack thereof of non-Roman citizens in Rome. And that is without passing mention on the suppression of the culture of the Gallic Druids or the Israelites of Judea. A Mediterranean empire cannot even be said to be a Roman original construction, because Greek trading colonies dotted the banks of the so-called Mare Nostrum long before Romulus had killed Remus. And then it may be known that Rome famously split down the middle and was divided into the Western Roman Empire and the Byzantine Roman Empire. And this Byzantine Empire, I would draw your attention to, lasted for 1,000 years longer than the Western one. And as the Western one succumbed to barbarian hordes, I would argue that what maintained the Byzantine faction of the Roman Empire was adopting a more Greek style of living, was adopting Greek government, Greek society, Greek practices, and that is what allowed it to maintain its dominance right the way up to the 15th century. Okay, well, if it's not empire, then perhaps infrastructure, of course, that previously mentioned. All roads lead to Rome, of course. I have but one point to counter this, and I would draw your attention to the fact that of the ancient wonders of the world, of those 7 ancient wonders, 4 were Greek-built and 2 were built in Greece herself. Okay, well, if it isn't infrastructure, then what about the army, of course, the great Roman army at which the world trembled? Well, if you raise that point, have you so soon forgotten of the tale of the 300 noble Spartans at Thermopylae? Have you so soon forgotten the courage that the Theban sacred band showed at Chaeronea? Have you so soon forgotten the great military mind of Epaminondas and the professional reforms of Philip II's Macedonian army? But then let us not allow it to alight from our minds. Even if it were the fact that Rome's army was greater than Greece's, we might ask why, and I argue that it is because Roman cruelty is an essential part of their culture. Brutish violence is a hallmark of Roman rule, so remembered today. In every corner of the map to which her empire expanded, Rome exercised cruelty. And it's not only her army that is inordinate in its bloodlust, but also... Hello then. I'm sorry? We're page 5. It is not only the Roman army which is inordinate in her bloodlust, but it is also Roman capital punishment. It makes the 1789 revolution in France, of which I am such an outspoken critic, look like afternoon tea. Crucifixion, dismemberment, disembowelment and evisceration were no barrier to the Romans. And it doesn't just stop there. Need I remind you of the phony religious implications that were raised as a justification for the brutal rape of Sejanus' daughter before her execution? I get the sense there was very little religion involved in that particular horrific crime. But then, of course, this is the government, isn't it? The government and the army. The Roman citizenry can't have been this cruel, of course. If the horrible cruelty of Roman law and Roman war gets you down as a citizen, well, you can always go to the games and take your mind off it. Remind me, what is it the Romans used to watch at the games? Oh yes, it was the sort of game that might have ended with the score Lions 500, Christians 0. I could go on again, but I shall spare you. To round off then, it is perhaps, to use a word so favoured by our magnanimous Archon at the back there, it is perhaps expedient to assess the impact of these two societies on the modern day. It would perhaps be fruitless of me to argue that Greece has had a greater influence on modern Britain than Rome has. And yet, I do think it is to Greece's credit that she has had so much influence on Britain at all, given that she is separated from us not only by 300 more miles than Rome is, but also by, depending on which point you take, a few another centuries, and also they never colonised us. It is perhaps probable that fewer than 100 Greeks ever set foot in ancient Britain, whereas the Romans occupied us for 4 centuries. So, in conclusion, Greece's importance is absolutely inestimable. Her role in shaping the world, shaping Rome's destiny and history, shaping our destiny, history, and indeed future, I would argue, secures for her, in my eyes, a place as the greater of the two societies. Rome was, to turn a phrase coined by Sir Isaac Newton, standing on the shoulders of giants, and those giants were Greek giants. I hope I have satiated your pathos, albeit with no inclination to celeritas. You need not undergo proskynesis, because it would only inflame my hubris, and it's unparliamentary. I now surrender you to the mercy of the computerized seated spiel of the Lady of the Opposition, which we have come to expect so ardently. Thank you very much.
Subscribe to Wanderings. You're welcome. Plug.